The sky above New Sydney was so clear. That day it made what followed feel like blasphemy. Children played in artificial parks, beneath dome glass, unaware that, hundreds of miles above them, the end had already begun. The alien fleet hung in the upper orbit. Cold, beautiful, silent, a wall of silver and void black warships shaped like spears aimed directly at Earth. There was no declaration, no warning. They didn't think humans deserved that. They called themselves the Valari. Dominion, and they'd ruled a third of the galaxy for over 12,000 years. Efficient, logical, utterly cruel. To them, Earth was nothing more than an infection that needed to be cut out. Before it spread, they had demanded surrender. What they got instead was a live transmission from human command. The face of Fleet Commander Darnell Hurst filled every screen from Luna to Mars, even hijacking the alien frequencies. There was blood on his uniform, smoke rising behind him. Somewhere in the background you could faintly hear a child crying. The Valari had struck early, targeting communication relays, ports, civilian towers. Still Hurst stood. He leaned in toward the camera, eyes like rusted iron, jaw locked tight. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply spoke like a man reading his enemy's eulogy. You want war? Then watch closely. And with that, the screen went dark. No one spoke for a moment, not on Earth, not on Mars, not on the command decks of the Valari flagships, just silence. Then a whisper began to echo across the systems, among soldiers, among miners, among the forgotten colonies. Then watch closely. 3 hours later, the first human retaliation began, not on Earth, not even near Earth. It started in the breach sectors, places where human tech couldn't possibly have reached yet. The Dominion called them safe zones. They weren't safe anymore. Valari Command Outpost Theta 9, a deep space logistics hub hidden inside a dying star's orbit, ceased transmission. No alarms, no survivors, just a final burst of binary code from a captured Dominion terminal. Theta 9 status repossessed by Terran forces. No gods here. At first the Valari thought it was a fluke. Then it happened again and again. 8 outposts lost in 24 hours. 17 in 36. Over 100 by the third sunrise. And then came the footage. Ari, war general named Zeroth Talvan, reviewed it personally. It had been recovered from a down scout drone. The footage was shaky, corrupted, but the message was clear. A human soldier, half his face burned, helmet cracked, carrying a bleeding comrade on his back, walked directly toward a Valari garrison. Alone, he was outnumbered, surrounded. Weaponless, they shouted for him to surrender. He dropped the body, reached down, and triggered the nuke implanted in his chest cavity. The last thing the drone saw before static took over was the soldier smiling. Zeroth crushed the data chip with his bare claws. Monsters, he hissed, but it was already too late. The myth of the suicide Vanguard was born. Back on Earth, Darnell Hurst sat in the underground war room below Antarctica's frost-cracked surface. His body was failing. He'd been exposed to radiation during the initial strikes, but he didn't care. The war was bigger than him now, bigger than command. It belonged to all of them. He stared at a map of Valari territory, so much red, so much space. They controlled, planets enslaved, cultures erased, children raised to believe humans were filthy, mindless beasts. And yet in the last 2 days, they'd already lost more ground than they had in any war in the last 4 millennia because humans weren't. Rational about war, they didn't fight. Clean, they didn't fight fair, they fought like it was personal because it was. Every city they burned, every civilian they slaughtered. It made Earth. Remember, it made the colonies unify. It made the broken, the scattered, the stubborn rise like fire. Humanity didn't have better ships, they didn't have superior tech. But they had something the Valari never understood: hate, raw, focused, legendary. It fueled every bullet, every charge, every explosion detonated under alien command towers. This wasn't a war anymore, it was a reckoning, and it had only just begun. The Valari underestimated Earth. It wasn't their first mistake, but it was the last one they'd ever make without bleeding for it. The problem wasn't just arrogance. The problem was pattern. The Dominion had conquered over 3,000 species. All of them broke the same way. First came the orbital bombardments, then the surrender negotiations, then assimilation. Humanity, though, wasn't interested in patterns. When the sky fell over New Sydney and the Valari began sending peacekeeping patrols into human cities, they expected compliance, submission, tears, maybe some scattered resistance. What they got instead were traps, mines hidden in food crates, children with neural disruptors, engineers who rewired Dominion tech into death machines using scrap and fury. The Valari called it terrorism. Earth called it Tuesday. In the ruins of the West American corridor, a soldier named Reyes crouched inside the shell of an old subway train, gun against his chest, sweat soaking through his tattered uniform. He'd lost his squad during a hit-and-run ambush near the fusion towers, and now he was deep behind enemy lines. Above him, the enemy moved in formation. Valari infantry gliding silently across broken glass and steel, their armor humming like insects. Reyes could hear the sharp clicks of their translator modules scanning for human voices. He was out of ammo. His comm was jammed, and he had a cracked rib from a fall during the retreat. But none of that mattered. Reyes wasn't looking to survive. He was looking to hurt them. He reached inside his boot, pulling out a vial no bigger than his thumb. CR9 blood fire, a corrosive chemical the engineers in Rio had designed specifically for Valari physiology. A single drop could melt through a soldier's carapace in seconds. Reyes didn't need to throw it. All he had to do was get close enough. He closed his eyes, whispered the last part of Hurst's message under his breath, like a prayer. Then watch closely. Then he stood coughing loudly, stepping into the open. 5 Ari aimed at him instantly. He didn't flinch. The Valari broadcast his death across their networks. Standard procedure: demoralize the enemy, show how futile resistance was. But footage backfired. The last 10 seconds, Reyes walking towards the squad, body already smoking from stun rounds, smiling through blood as he broke the vial against his own chest. Spread like wildfire across every surviving human channel. They called him the burned ghost, a man who turned his own death into a weapon. Recruitment tripled overnight. Meanwhile, in the orbit of Jupiter, command frigate Ashwake drifted like a wounded animal. She'd taken heavy hits, 3 punctures through her dorsal plating, engine damage, and most of her bridge crew dead, but she was still moving, still transmitting. Inside, Lieutenant Grady limped through a smoke-filled corridor, his left arm hanging useless from a shoulder injury. He didn't have time to stop. The reactor was overheating and the suppression systems were offline. If he didn't get to the core and reset the regulators, Ashwick would become a star-sized fireball. The ship groaned. Like it was alive. Grady reached the core hatch jammed. He slammed his good shoulder into it. Once, twice, nothing. So he kicked it. It opened. Inside, the heat punched him like a god. His skin blistered instantly. He ignored it, stepping toward the reactor console. The Valari didn't expect the humans to still fight in this condition. They had already moved on, leaving the frigate to die. But Grady wasn't just trying to save Ashwick, he was setting a trap. With shaky fingers, he activated the failsafe protocol. Something only a human would think of. An engine overload masked as a distress beacon, a lure. Valari boarding ships were drawn to wounded prey. They docked. By the time they realized what was happening, Grady was long dead. His last message burned into the console display. Next time, finish the job. The explosion took out 2 enemy carriers and disabled a third. 1 man, 1 dying ship. 3 enemy fleets delayed back on Earth. Under the ice-buried base in Antarctica, Hearst reviewed the casualty reports. The numbers were obscene. Colonies wiped out, civilian losses rising. The Dominion wasn't just fighting a war. They were making an example, and yet humanity wasn't breaking. It was evolving. He turned to his adjutant, a scar-faced woman named Aurorin, who hadn't smiled since Shanghai fell. They still think we're fighting to survive, Hearst said, voice low. They don't understand. We're fighting to win. Aurorin nodded. Permission to activate Operation Furnace. Hearst stared at the screen showing orbital positions of Valari fleets near Saturn. Light the match. Operation Furnace was a war crime waiting to happen, and the humans knew it. They just didn't care anymore. It began with the hijacking of a Valari terraforming platform orbiting the gas giant, designed to extract elements from volatile atmospheres. It was repurposed by Earth engineers into a pressure cannon, one that could fire canisters of compressed dark matter into enemy ships, destabilizing their energy cores from the inside. No explosion, no debris, just implosions, entire cruisers folding inward like crushed paper. The Valari panicked, not because of the weapons power, but because of the message that came with each shot. The humans didn't just want to survive. They wanted the Valari to suffer. They started naming every kill. For Jakarta, for Dust Colony 7, for the babies in the ice shelters, 1 kill. 1 name, 1 grudge. Across the Dominion's outer colonies, insurrections began. Turns out humans weren't the only ones tired of Valari boots on their necks. Other species, long conquered, long silent, began to see Earth's defiance as a beacon. Old flags were raised, forbidden languages were spoken. Again, resistance movements that had been dormant for generations suddenly came alive, and everywhere they rose, humans were already there, smuggling weapons, training fighters, bleeding beside strangers who now called them brothers. The Dominion tried to retaliate, but it was like trying to drown fire on the moon of Arth. A mining colony turned death camp. A human named Langston led a prison break with nothing but a spoon, a stolen torch, and 2 broken legs. He crawled through sewage tunnels for 3 days, guided only by memory and hate. When he reached the Armory, he didn't stop to rest. He didn't even stop to breathe. He activated the imps, unsealed the cages, and died 30 seconds later from a ruptured heart, but by then it didn't matter. Over 600 slaves were free, and one of them, an old warrior from the Ven species, broadcast a single sentence across the rebel networks. I saw what a human looks like when he's dying, and I've never felt more alive. Back on Earth, Hearst could barely stand anymore. The radiation was eating him alive. His skin was pale, his fingers shook, but he refused to leave the war room. Not yet, not until it was done. He looked at the latest intercepted message from Valari High Command. They were asking for negotiations. Hearst didn't laugh, he didn't smile. He just leaned forward and through cracked lips whispered, "Now they're watching." The Dominion had sent billions of soldiers across the stars, but they didn't expect to be fighting ideas. Idea of revenge, the idea of freedom. The idea that maybe, just maybe, humans weren't the barbarians, they were the mirror, and the galaxy was finally looking at itself. In the black void between stars, in a stolen Valari transport ship, a squad of human saboteurs waited in silence. They were headed for the Valari Prime Nexus, the core of the Empire. Their mission wasn't to kill, it was to broadcast, to show the Dominion's own citizens the horrors they'd inflicted for centuries, to show them Earth scars, to show them children in rubble, to show them old men strangling alien war beasts with bare hands, to make them watch, because that was what Hearst had promised. You want war, then watch closely, and across the stars they did, one system at a time, one burned world at a time, one act of glorious, unforgiving vengeance at a time. Humanity wasn't just surviving. Humanity was performing, and the whole galaxy had front row seats. The air aboard the Ghost Knife was razor sharp and thin, like breathing through steel wool. No gravity, no light except the red interior glow washing over the squad. Like blood, the ship had no windows, no official designation, no insignia, not even a transponder. It wasn't supposed to exist, but it did. And so did the 6 men inside it. They were all silent, veterans of the kind of war that didn't make the news feeds, the ones that crawled into your skin and stayed there long after the fighting stopped, the kinds of men who stopped counting kills a long time ago, not out of guilt, but because the numbers didn't matter. There was no leader, not really, but if you had to pick one, it would be the man sitting furthest back, face half melted by plasma, one eye covered by a jagged old military optic. His name was Halden. He used to be someone, some rank, some metal, some legend back when Earth still had cities instead of ruins, but now he was just a name whispered in old battlegrounds and prison tunnels, the kind of name the Valari taught their children to fear. The squad called him Gravedigger, not because he buried bodies, because he buried empires. The Ghost Knife was on approach to Valari Prime, the capital of the Dominion, a place so sacred even their own species needed biometric clearance to orbit within 10,000 clicks. The mission, not to destroy it, to expose it. Human command had learned something in the early days of the war, something the Valari never imagined primitive species like humanity could understand. Perception was power, and if they could twist the perception of Valari Prime from a flawless monument of order into a bleeding monument of shame, then the entire Dominion would fracture. From the inside, Halden's squad was tasked with planting a signal relay into the city's central comms hub. 1 device, 1 feed. The plan wasn't elegant, it was suicidal. And Halden had volunteered without flinching. 30 minutes before drop, the cabin finally broke its silence. Dax, the youngest, cleared his throat and said, "You guys think there's a chance we survive this?" No one answered, not until Halden looked up from sharpening the edge of a knife he'd stolen from a Valari general during the raid on the asteroid prison. His voice was dry, cold. "Survival's not the mission." Dax didn't speak again. He didn't have to. Everyone already knew the truth. Nobody on that ship expected to come back. And that was fine. They weren't there to live, they were there to show back on Earth, deep inside the war-scarred concrete bunkers beneath what used to be Alaska. Commander Hurst stared at the stars projected onto the dome ceiling above his chair. He could feel his insides rotting. The radiation treatments were no longer holding. He hadn't eaten in 4 days. Doctors told him he had a week, maybe 2. He told them to piss off. There was still work to do. He reviewed the ghost knife's route again, the probability calculations, the subspace blackouts, the risk of signal loss. "They won't make it," said Oren, standing next to him, arms folded. "We're sending 6 men into the lion's heart and hoping they spit in its eye before it bites." "No," Hurst replied, "we're not hoping. We're promising." When the ghost knife pierced Valari Prime's defense field, it didn't cloak. It didn't jam their sensors. It broadcasted its presence, deliberate, aggressive, loud. They weren't sneaking in. They were coming in like a declaration. The Valari scrambled. Sirens wailed across the skies. Gunships detached from towers. Swarms of hover drones swept the incoming trajectory. The ship didn't flinch, didn't dodge. It crashed right through a museum dome commemorating 10,000 years of Valari conquest. Glass shattered like time itself. Statues of ancient warriors crumbled under the impact, and from the wreckage walked 6 soldiers, weapons up, faces calm. The citizens of Valari Prime had never seen human eyes before, only images, propaganda, sketches of monsters. What they saw now were not monsters. They were reapers. Dax took a hit within the first 20 ma. Plasma bolt straight through the chest. He fell to one knee, coughing blood. Eyes wide with shock. Halden didn't stop. He only turned long enough to say, "Get up or die kneeling." Dax got up. They advanced block by block, exchanging fire with elite guards, taking hits, losing ground, then reclaiming it twice as hard. Civilians screamed and scattered like insects, but they saw it. They saw humans fighting their streets, not begging, not hiding, fighting, and they saw their own soldiers losing inside the comm towers. Lower level, Sando and Reeves rigged explosives across the power conduits. If they couldn't plant the signal, they'd at least make damn sure the Valari couldn't use this place again. Reeves, bleeding from a throat wound, spoke into his mic. "Holden, we got the climb ahead. Elevators are down. We're rigging a vertical boost." "Copy," Halden responded, but he wasn't talking into a mic. He was talking into a Valari soldier's ear, one he had pinned against the wall, blade under the creature's jaw. "What's the climb time to the Coricomms?" The Valari hissed. "You think a few savages can?" Halden slit his throat halfway and whispered, "Try again." They Reached the comms core 40 minutes. Later, only 3 of them left. Dax was gone, so were Sando and Reeves. Blown apart, holding back the second wave. Falk, the heavy gunner, was missing a leg and still firing from the stairs like it was his job to die. And it was. Halden and Brooke, his last man, planted the relay on the towers. Central data stream. A heartbeat passed. Then the signal went live, and every single screen, monitor, data pad, and neural feed across the Dominion blinked. Black, then white, then human. It wasn't a speech, it wasn't propaganda, it was reality. Footage played of Earth cities. After the Valori strikes, parents holding burnt children, empty streets covered in blood and glass, soldiers dying in the arms of other soldiers, begging them to send the footage. Then came the retaliations, humans strapped with explosives taking out whole cruisers, saboteurs inside Valori, factories turning production lines into graveyards, images of rebellion across conquered worlds, other species rising, joining, and over all of it, one sentence echoing again and again in every language, every dialect, every neural stream. You want war? Then watch closely. Back in the core tower, Valori elites breached the comms level. They found Halden standing over the device, one hand on his side where dark blood poured freely. Brooke was already dead, shot twice in the chest, but not before locking the signal override switch. The commander stepped forward. He was massive, decorated, confident. "You've already lost," he said in perfect English. "The feed will be taken down. Your little show will be forgotten." Halden smiled through bloodied teeth. "You really think this is the only feed?" The commander frowned. "We've got 6 more on every world your kind forgot to look at." He pointed toward the city skyline where towers were starting to burn. "This isn't a broadcast, it's a funeral." They killed Halden slowly, but not before he laughed in their faces. And when they dumped his body from the tower window, the crowd below didn't cheer. They stared, some whispered, some cried, and one Valori child reached down and touched his blood like it was holy. Back on Earth, Commander Hurst finally let go of the chair's armrest. His fingers left blood smears behind. Oren turned to him, the signals reaching every corner, even the deep colonies. Hurst didn't respond. He was staring at the screen, watching the face of Holden. Just before he died, lean into the camera and say the final line of the feed. "This isn't revenge. This is justice delayed. You thought we were just another species to break, but you forgot one thing. Humans never forget." Then static, then silence. Hurst leaned back, took one final breath, and whispered, "Now they're watching." His pulse monitor flatlined. The war was far from over, but the galaxy was different now. The Valori were no longer feared, they were doubted. Every world looked toward Earth and saw fire, not just destruction, resolve, and in the dark corners of forgotten systems, rebels etched words into metal, cloth, and skin. "You want war? Then watch closely." They didn't mourn Halden, not the way the Valori expected. No candles, no silence, no memorials, just more bullets, more fire, more blood, because Halden wasn't a symbol of loss. He was a signal, the kind that cut through fear like a knife, the kind that made even the weakest colony whisper, if he could, walk into their capital and die screaming truth. "What's stopping us?" Across the stars, the phrase caught fire, sprayed in graffiti across stolen Valeri warships etched into walls with broken glass whispered in huddled bunkers. You want war? Then watch closely. And the Valeri watched. They watched the rebellion they ignored turn into a coordinated offensive. They watched patrol ships vanish without trace in territories they claimed were pacified. They watched their own governors be dragged into the streets by people they'd enslaved for generations. People now armed with human weapons, human grit, and a human message. This is payback with interest. In a dry canyon, carved into the crust of a planet called Dartha 6, a man named Colt Bremer lit match with his thumbnail and dragged it along the edge of his boot. He didn't smoke. Not anymore. Not since the mines collapsed on Karina outpost, not since he dug his brother out with his own shredded hands just to find he'd suffocated 10 minutes earlier. He didn't light the match for warmth. He did it to remember what fire looked like. The Valeri had turned Darth 6 into a work camp, forced breeding pits, or extraction, mindless labor, the kind of place that didn't even earn a name on Dominion maps. Colt had lived here since the age of 14. Now 32, he was the leader of Cell 7, one of the human-less insurgent groups tearing across the outer rim, and he was about to start a war inside a war. Intel says the Valeri are hosting some kind of summit, said Griggs, one of his lieutenants, bent over a cracked hollow map. Colt stared at the display. 5 elite commanders, 3 regional governors, and 1 broadcast terminal that fed propaganda into 27 subsystems. We take that room, Colt said, voice flat. We don't just kill them, we kill their message. We don't have the manpower to hold it, Griggs warned. We're not holding anything, Colt replied. We're sending a message just like Halden did. That name still carried weight. Every soldier on Darth 6 knew what he did, knew how he died, knew the face he made when they slit his throat, like a man watching his enemy fall from within. Colt didn't plan to die that way. He planned to drag as many of them down with him as possible. The operation was called Needle Point. 12 insurgents. One objective: take the broadcast tower. During the summit, inject an untraceable data virus coded in a dead Terran dialect and leak every war crime the Valeri had hidden from their own citizens. The virus wouldn't shut the tower down. It would amplify it so their people, those blue-kin forried architects of genocide, could see the skin peeled off their own lies. No theatrics, no human message this time. Just the raw files, photos, video, audio, dead kids, screaming women, minors begging to die, crying children, clutching severed arms, entire prison colonies deleted from maps, the truth unfiltered. 2 hours before the strike, Colt sat alone with his gear beside him. Armor was patched together from Valeri corpse suits and scavenged colony scrap. His rifle was old, a human-manufactured X-88 sniper carbine from before the war even began. He cleaned it slowly, ritualistically. Griggs approached. You sure about this? Colt looked up. You see any other way to make them bleed from the inside? Griggs sighed, sitting across from him. I keep thinking of my daughter back on Thalos Prime. They took her to one of the camps. She was just 9, had this dumb stuffed bear she wouldn't let go of. Even when he stopped himself, swallowed the pain like glass. This is for her, Colt said, for all of them. Griggs nodded. The breach came at nightfall, disguised as maintenance workers. Colt's squad entered through the underbelly of the Tower. Valari tech was elegant but naive. They never expected their slaves to understand pressure locks and conduit bypasses. They made it to the third floor before the alarm tripped. Colt didn't hesitate. He shot the first guard through the neck, then spun and dropped the second with a triple tap to the chest. Griggs tossed a stunned char, and the lights died with a hiss. Move. Colt barked. Every second mattered. By the fifth floor, Bennett was down, torso blown open by a plasma bolt. Heron lost half his face but kept crawling still, dragging the virus drive behind him. Doors to the broadcast chamber were just ahead, locked. Colt planted thermite. 10 seconds. They'll be waiting, Griggs warned. Colt looked at him and said something he hadn't said in years. Good. The door blew inward in a shower of sparks and fire. The Valeri inside had never fought like this. Humans didn't posture, didn't taunt, didn't hesitate. They stormed. In 30 seconds, the entire chamber was drenched in red. Valari bodies twisted in unnatural shapes. The governors were gunned down mid-sentence. One of them tried to plead, "Please, we can negotiate." Colt shot him in the mouth. "You're 20 years late." Griggs pulled out the virus drive, slotted it into the command console. Lights flickered, panels sparked, then every screen everywhere went black and began to show everything. Back on Valeri Prime in the high halls of the Dominion, people screamed, not in pain and shame. For the first time in their species' long history, they saw what their empire really was. Not a shining beacon of order and evolution, but a machine of suffering. Old lies fell apart like rotted bone. Soldiers started refusing orders. Entire battalions mutinied. Civilians tore down their own flags. Lesser conquered species rose overnight in armed defiance. What started as rebellion turned into civil fracture, and the virus kept playing. No propaganda, no spin, just truth played on loop. On Darth 6, Colt stood over the tower's highest balcony. His chest was bleeding. 3 holes in his side. Griggs was slumped beside him, breathing shallow and broken. "You think they saw it?" Griggs rasped. Colt nodded, blood dripping from his mouth. "Yeah, they saw it." Below them, the night sky burned. Valeri ships pulling out, others turning on their own. The planet's population flooding into the streets like ants freed from a crushed nest. Colt didn't smile, but he felt it. For the first time in years, victory, not the kind you write into history books, the kind that's 1 inch by bloody inch. 2 days later, Human Command intercepted a coded message from within the Dominion's ruling core. 6 words: "We need to talk, no cameras." Oren read it, then set the data slate down beside Hurst's empty chair. There was no reply, only silence. But that silence wasn't defeat, it was satisfaction, because now the galaxy wasn't just watching, it was bleeding. And Earth was still standing. They were no longer afraid of the Valeri. Not because the Valeri had become weaker, but because humanity had finally discovered how far they were willing to go, and there was no turning back. Desert world of Hessen 3 had never seen war before. It was a mining colony on the edge of Dominion space, all rust-cold rock and massive sandstorms, where ore was pulled from the ground by claw-handed drones and the labor of slaves. Human Venex Gile thousands from dozens of conquered races until the broadcast, until the virus, until the truth bled through every control panel. Hologram and sleep screen, the riots started within the hour. By the third day, the guards were dragged into pits they'd once thrown others into. By the end of the week, the Valari garrison had been wiped out entirely. And standing in the middle of the shattered governor's tower, blood on his boots and rage, his voice was a man called Tyan Rek. He'd been working the mine since he was 17. He wasn't a soldier, wasn't a rebel. Just another forgotten cog in the Dominion's engine, but now he was something else. Now he was the voice of Hessen III's uprising. He stood on the balcony that had once belonged to Valari officers and stared at the faces below. Thousands of them, some still in chains, some with their own shackles broken and wrapped around their fists like brass knuckles. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't step forward. He just spoke. We begged for help. You ignored us. We waited for the Dominion to be merciful. They gave us silence. Then Earth screamed loud enough for the stars to hear, so we screamed back. The Valari watched, and now it's our turn. He paused, held up a fist coated in dried blood. No more waiting, no more kneeling. If they want war, make them choke on it. The crowd erupted. That speech wasn't broadcast to the galaxy, but it didn't need to be. It was remembered. 3 weeks later, a signal reached what was left of human commands. Central Fleet in orbit above Mars. It was encrypted, embedded in a piece of old Dominion code, but its meaning was clear. Hessen III stands with Earth. We're ready. The message was signed simply, Tyan Rek, Citizen Commander, not Admiral, not General, just Citizen. And that's what made it matter. Inside the hull of strike frigate Sable Hook, Commander Merrick V read the message 3 times before finally closing his eyes. He'd lost half his fleet over Europa Station, lost his son when the ice domes collapsed under orbital bombardment, lost his wife when Dominion agents detonated a bomb in the hospital tents. On Pharaoh 5, he had nothing left except orders and revenge. He stared at the fleet roster, 42 ships, half limping, most patched together with stolen tech and salvaged wreckage. Rest were ghost vessels, automated suicide rigs designed to ram enemy capital ships at sublight speeds. He spoke into the command channel, voice low and precise. Prepare for Operation Leviathan. The officers around him froze. Leviathan wasn't a mission, it was a punishment. The Dominion still held the Corsari Arc, a chain of systems that supplied nearly 70% of their military fuel. Its refinery world Vedrick was a fortress, planetary shields, orbital batteries, 3 full naval fleets stationed nearby, 2 important to abandon, 2 powerful to assault. Until now, Merrick wasn't going in with stealth. He wasn't interested in surprise. He wanted them wide awake. Sable Hook jumped into the Vedrick system alongside 17 other ships, each broadcasting Halden's final words on repeat across every open Dominion frequency. You want war? Then watch closely. The Dominion scrambled to intercept, but Merrick wasn't trying to win the battle. He was trying to destroy the economy that powered the war. The first wave hit the shield grids. Human drones laced with dark matter cores, detonating in precisely calculated chain reactions. One by one, the planetary shields collapsed. The second wave came. Seconds later, 6 ghost ships, no life forms aboard, no heat signatures, just mass and velocity. They broke through the remaining orbital defenses and slammed into the refinery rings. each one rigged with planetary impact nukes. The sky turned black. The stars vanished behind fire. Billion gallons of Dominion fuel exploded in a mushroom of red mist and fractured metal, and for the first time in the war, a Valari emperor issued a retreat. They called it a terrorist attack. They said humans had no honor. But every ship that limped back to human command brought with it recruits. Not just humans, not just rebels, but Dominion citizens, defectors, tired soldiers, Valari who couldn't stomach the lies anymore. His name was Kelton Voris, former captain of the Valari 5th Skyarner Division. He surrendered himself on Darth 6 under a white flag, drawn with ash on his own armor. Colt Bremer met him personally. They stood in a ruined cathedral, sunlight spilling through holes in the roof, rifles slung low. Kelton didn't kneel, didn't beg. He just said, "My sons are dead. My world is gone. I believed what they told me until I saw what you showed us." Colt stared him down. "So you want redemption?" "No." Kelton said, "I want vengeance." That night under torchlight in what used to be the slave barracks, the first joint command of humans and Valari rebels was formed. They weren't friends. They didn't need to be. They were survivors with common enemies, and across the stars, the phrase never died. You want war? Then watch closely. Now it wasn't just a warning, it was a promise, a virus that infected every battlefield, every city, every fallen moon. The Valari had unleashed war on Earth, thinking it would be clean, quick, and final, but now Earth was fighting like the last species in the galaxy with nothing to lose. And the Valari, they were finally realizing they had everything to lose. They stopped broadcasting Earth's words, not because the Valari had stopped hearing them, but because they had started listening, and that terrified the Dominion more than any fleet. High above the fractured moon of Gorinth, where broken satellites drifted like corpses in a slow dance, a Valari warship hung in orbit burning. It had once been called the Inevitable Ascension, a vessel feared across 3 sectors, its commander responsible for 5 planetary cleanses. Now it was drifting, broken open like a wound. Inside, soldiers screamed through sealed hallways as firestorms gutted the hull, tearing through oxygen lines and fusion reactors. No enemy ship had fired on it, no human vessel had touched its plating. It had been destroyed from within. 4 days earlier, Captain Kelton Voris stood on the dusty soil of Dartha 6, flanked by human rebels and watching his own people dig graves for Dominion officers. Some of the dead had once taken orders from him, some he had personally trained. There was no ceremony, no speeches, just the sound of shovels breaking dry earth and the weight of silence. He didn't mourn them, he mourned who he used to be. He turned to Colt Bremer, who stood with a bandage across his ribs and a cigarette in his teeth. "I want to do more than fight," Kelton said. "I want to undo what I helped build." Colt looked him over, then nodded toward the salvaged Dominion console at the far end of the room. "Then let's break something sacred." Operation Lantern Hook was born from that moment. It wasn't a military assault. It wasn't a bombing run. It was a betrayal turned surgical strike. The plan: use Kelton's old Dominion clearance codes to gain access to the Inevitable Ascension under the pretense of high command inspection. Once on board, he would hand off control to a small human strike team hidden in supply Containers, once inside, they'd make the ship turn on itself, lock down escape. Pods, reroute AI targeting, ignite. Reactors, it was ugly but clean kills, were a luxury of the powerful. The infiltration team was led by a man named Rig Danner, ex-Black Ops, court marshaled for executing a Valari ambassador during ceasefire talks. When command reactivated his file, he didn't hesitate, just shaved his head, loaded his rifle and said, "Where do you want the blood?" He and his squad, 5 men, 1 woman, were slipped into cryohold. Containers wired for silent exhale and heartbeat suppression, smuggled in like cattle ready to butcher. When the Ascension's AI detected Kelton's arrival, it greeted him with synthetic reverence. "Welcome back, Captain Voris. Your presence is unexpected. Shall I inform Subcommander Rashel?" "No," he replied, voice steady. "This is a classified override inspection. You'll log this under Directive Epsilon 19. Understood." The AI didn't question him. Valari pride had always been their strength, and their weakness. Rig's team was awakened inside the cargo bay, covered in synthetic coolant and wrapped in stealth foil. They moved like shadows, weapons magnet locked to their spines, facial implants disguised under Dominion armor, no words, just glances. They were already inside one of the most secure ships in the fleet, with nothing but their will and hatred keeping them alive just the way they liked it. Kelton walked the halls of his old ship with the casual confidence of a man returning home. He passed soldiers who still saluted him, past officers who didn't know they were shaking hands with a ghost. At the main command junction, he keyed in an override and rerouted power from secondary systems into the lower hangar. It was an old signal, a code from Earth's forgotten war books. The signal meant fire in the walls, opened the flood. Rig received it mid-crawl through the vent systems. He tapped twice on his helmet mic. The team split. 2 moved toward the bridge, tasked with killing command and seizing the AI core. 3 moved toward engineering, where the reactor waited, vulnerable and humming like a sleeping giant. Rig went alone to sabotage the oxygen levels, lock the airlocks, and kill the fail-safe evacuation systems. The mission didn't need survivors, it needed witnesses. In the command deck, Subcommander Ralvior was mid-comm with Valari High Command when the bridge doors hissed open. He looked up, half annoyed, half curious. Then a shot cracked through the air, blood sprayed across his display screen, and the war room erupted. One of Rig's men, Corvin, dragged the commander's corpse to the console and jammed a data spike into the neural port. "Start the purge," he hissed. "Seal the blast doors." "Copy," came the reply from engineering. "Reactor's hours, we're cycling it now." Rig's voice cut in over the comms, cold and final. "End it." Kelton stood near the observation window watching the stars. He didn't look when the emergency klaxon sounded, didn't move when the ship lights turned red, didn't blink when screams echoed down the corridors. He simply whispered, "Now watch what you made me." Then he drew his sidearm and put a bullet through his own gut. The inevitable ascension tore itself apart over the next 18 minutes. No one escaped. No warning got out, but the signal did. Rig had plugged a transponder into the Ascension's black box just before the reactor collapsed. It streamed one message on every Dominion frequency before disintegrating. Burn in the fire you built. The Valeri tried to call it a rogue event, a betrayal by a corrupted officer, but that lie was dust before it landed because others followed. More ships, more detonations, more sabotage. Their own soldiers turning, killing, whispering Halden's words in their sleep at the edge of the galaxy inside a storm-lit bunker on Deimos 9, a rebel leader watched the news feed flicker. The Ascension was gone, thousands of elite Valari dead, no trace, just a flash in a name, Kellen Voris, a traitor. To some, a hero, to others, but to Earth. And to all who still thought he was just another man who'd finally understood what it meant when Hearst spoke the words, "You want war? Then watch closely." The Dominion was dying, not all at once. Not like a world-ending missile, or a supernova swallowing a sun. That would have been mercy. No, it was slower rot. From within, words had done what weapons could not. On the ash plains of Valori, Prime's outer district, a man stood beneath a ruined archway. Wind tore through the city, carrying smoke, burnt data sheets, and the wailing songs of the last loyalists still clinging to doctrine. The man was human, unarmored, blood drying on his coat. His name was Eric Dern, a field commander from the very first Terran counter-offensives. Name lost to the dead list, presumed gone after the fall of Alexandria 4, but Eric hadn't died. He had disappeared, vanished into the black, into the back channels of the rebellion, training, bleeding, killing from the shadows. And now he was standing in the capital, not as a conqueror, as a witness. 3 days earlier, his team had landed on Valori Prime under blackout conditions, fight in by a rogue Dominion cruiser, whose captain no longer saluted the Empire. They didn't drop bombs, they didn't fire shots, they distributed memory drives, each one loaded with truth, raw footage of Dominion atrocities, decrypted communicates, the screams of children from purification zones. They passed them to merchants, data rats, angry students in university alleys. No instructions, no speeches, just evidence, just reality. And it spread because even Valari loyalty couldn't survive unfiltered truth. Back in orbit, a Dominion Council frigate circled above the chaos. Inside, a debate raged among the remaining voices of the high regime. They spoke in panic tones, not the language of domination but of desperation. They've poisoned our citizens with lies, spat one admiral. No, corrected another, more softly, with sight. They turned to the only one who had not spoken since the meeting began, Lord Imperator Kethsal, the last true ruler of the Dominion. His robes were flawless, his face calm, but his eyes were empty. He had watched 5 of his own family die in the last 6 months, one by suicide, another executed for treason, the rest killed in bombings or torn apart by their own security when they refused to abandon the old code. He finally stood. The humans will not stop, he said. We can still negotiate, murmured someone. Perhaps no, Keithel interrupted. You don't understand. This is not a war of territory. It's not even revenge anymore. He turned to the screen, where a looping transmission showed the death of Kelton Voris and the destruction of the inevitable Ascension. It's a performance, and we are the audience now. In the underground ruins of a collapsed Valori Archive Center, Eric's team had discovered something important. Project Purate and Extinction Protocol files buried in Dominion Hardlight data cores. originally meant for their own use. Should the Dominion ever fear total collapse, it was brutal, automated. Ships silent, AI-guided program to raise planetary surfaces and inject synthetic viruses into atmospheres. Civilian extermination, ecosystem sterilization, no memory, no trace. There were 12 of them, still hidden, still active. Eric stared at the data display, his jaw clenched. They lose and they take everyone else with them. The team's engineer, Ravik, a grizzled ex-Genetics tech from Mars' second ring, spoke up. We shut it down, right? Eric said nothing for a long time. Then he looked up. No, we don't shut it down. What? We broadcast it. That single decision shattered the last illusions of the Dominion. Within 20 hours, the footage had reached over 200 Dominion worlds, screens in marketplaces, homes, shrines, and war rooms showed the genocide protocols. Valeri citizens watched in horror as their own empire planned their extinction, not Earth's extinction. Everyone's. There is no future with this empire, the voiceover said, only fire. Entire colonies revolted instantly. 2 moons detonated their own defense grids to prevent Dominion control. Civil war fractured in real time, soldiers refusing orders mid-battle, turning their rifles on commanders. It was chaos, the kind of chaos Earth had been waiting for. Back on Darth 6, Colt Bremer watched the news unfold from a war room built inside the bones of a destroyed Valeri beast transport, wires strung through vertebrae, maps projected on the wall of a rib cage. He leaned on the table, blood on his knuckles, still bandaged from the last offensive on the refinery line. Kelton's betrayal had opened the door. Ark's broadcast had kicked it off its hinges, and now the last assault could begin. What's the capital status? Colt asked. A young recon tech pulled up the data. Grids unstable, most satellites blind. AI has gone dark, local factions fighting each other and Earth's people. There's fire in every district, civilians taking over the old towers. Even the statues are coming down. Colt turned to the window. Beyond it, the sky was beginning to show colors not native to the planet. Earth vessels, hundreds of them, all primed, all waiting. He touched the comm. This is Bremer, final directive. We move on prime, all fire, no mercy. You want war? He didn't have to finish it. They all said it with him. Then watch closely. In the last true throne hall of the Dominion, Kethel sat in silence. He wore no crown, no armor, just the dark robes of judgment. Outside, his cities burned, his symbols shattered, his authority faded like breath on glass. He didn't weep, he didn't scream. He simply stared at the screen, at one of Earth's final messages, played on repeat now by even his own fractured networks. You offered peace as a leash. You offered order through ash. But now we offer you your own gift, oblivion. The Earth fleet didn't wait for a surrender. There was no peace talk, no diplomatic envoy, only fire in orbit. Strike cruiser Nox Evenfall, commanded by Marek, launched the first payload. He didn't blink as the missiles detached, gliding toward Valeri Prime's planetary shield matrix. For Hurst, he muttered, the shields fractured instantly. Too many internal systems had failed. Explosions rained across the surface. Precision strikes, not aimed at civilians, only at command towers, military zones, monuments to slavery and propaganda. It wasn't about wiping out a race. It was about erasing the throne. On the ground, Eric Dern marched through the outer city streets, with civilians falling in behind him. Valari defectors, human insurgents, Zile shock fighters, then tribesmen. Each carried a weapon, each carried the truth in their bones. They didn't stop. For resistance, they crushed it. They didn't take prisoners. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to end a legacy. As the palace fell, fire climbed the walls like vines. Inside, Kethel stood, robes burning. He watched the last door open, and in stepped Tyan. Wretch, the miner turned commander from Hessen 3, no armor, just a crude rifle. His eyes met the Emperor's. Do it. Kethel whispered. No, Typhon said. He aimed lower and shot the throne. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. You don't get to die proud. Capital fell that night, no formal surrender, no treaties, just silence. And then cheering across the galaxy, on Earth, on the colonies, on broken outposts, on the enslaved moons. Victory not celebrated by generals, but by the people, the ones who watched and finally saw the empire fall. In the broadcast halls, Eric stood at the console, bruised and half blind from shrapnel. He looked into the camera. This war started with arrogance, continued with fire, ended with justice. We do not ask for your loyalty. We do not demand your surrender. We only offer you a choice. He paused. Blood trickled down his cheek. Stand free or stand in our way. Then he leaned forward. You wanted war. Now you've seen it. It didn't feel like victory, not at first, not even after. The smoke cleared and the bodies stopped piling, not even when the last Valari banner was torn down and fed to the flames on Valari Prime, because victory wasn't quiet, it was hollow, it echoed. And everywhere it echoed, it asked the same question. What now? Commander Eric Dern sat in the ruins of what used to be the Valari throne room. The marble floor was cracked, blood and soot smeared across its ornate design. The pillars had fallen, the skylight was gone, replaced by a view of the broken sky, ships slowly drifting like ghosts above a planet that no longer ruled. He hadn't spoken in hours. He just sat with his back against the remains of the throne, boots soaked in dust, rifle laid across his lap like a dead limb. There was no speech, no celebration, no parade. The war had ended, not with cheers, but with the kind of silence only murder leaves behind. Across the galaxy, news feeds ran wild. They called it a revolution, a reckoning, the rebirth of the outer systems. One outlet said, from ashes the humans rose, fire in their eyes, vengeance in their blood. But they didn't see the cost. They didn't walk the battlefields of Darth 6, where the air still smelled of melted bone. They didn't carry the charred remains of children pulled from the schools the Dominion bombed when the rebellion surged. They didn't know what Earth had paid to win. Only the dead knew. 3 weeks after the fall of the Dominion, Tyre stood on the balcony of the old governor's building on Hessen 3, staring out at the rust-red horizon. Colony was free now, technically, but free didn't mean safe, didn't mean fed, didn't mean whole. Most of the population was starving. Water lines barely worked. Half the buildings were unstable. The Dominion was gone, yes, but so was order. Infrastructure control. The system was eating itself now. Rek ran a hand down his face, rough with scar tissue and age. He didn't wear a uniform, just plain clothes, dust-streaked and burnt at the sleeve. Behind him, his second-in-command stepped into the room. We got a response, she said. From who? Earth, he turned slowly, real Earth or one of the colonies calling themselves Earth now. Real Earth, Central Unified. Network Mars Relay Node, she handed him. The data tablet, Rich looked it over. Message, short but unmistakable. You've earned your freedom. Now learn to keep it, that was all, no. Promises of aid, no weapons, no troops. Just a reminder, a lesson because Earth had figured something out during the war. You don't save the galaxy by giving it peace, you let it earn peace by remembering what it cost in the heart of Earth's new War Council station. Erebus orbiting the shattered moon of Thalos, Commander Merrick V stood in front of the war map. Systems blinked red, yellow, green. But green didn't mean peace, it meant stabilized. For now, he adjusted the synthetic brace on his arm, the one fused to his bone after a Dominion blast broke him on Europa. Status on Prime. He asked, no formal government yet, replied the comms officer. They're forming a neutral council mix of Valari civilians, rebel leaders and defectors. Any resistance, pockets loyalists. Nothing organized. The people don't want the Dominion back. They want food, water, security. And what do they want from us? The officer paused. Nothing. Merrick nodded. Good. He didn't want to be a conqueror. Humanity had already carried the weight of vengeance. They didn't want to carry chains too. At the edge of known space, a refugee freighter drifted toward an uninhabited planet, its hull scorched, engines failing. Inside, a young Valari child clutched a ration bar given to her by human rebel just days before. She stared at it like it was holy. Her mother whispered stories about Earth now, not horror stories, stories of fire, stories of people who didn't kneel when the sky burned, of people who bled for the right to speak again, of the words that changed the stars. You want war, then watch closely. In a quiet bunker on Earth beneath what was once Boston, an old recording played on loop, fuzzy static filled, blood on the lens. Commander Darnell Hurst's final words. The first time he spoke them, his voice was tired, low, eyes red from smoke and radiation. You want war, then watch closely. A technician sat in the room alone. He didn't skip the clip, he just watched again and again, because sometimes the only way to remember how far you've come is to remember the face of the man who told the galaxy, we are not yours to break. Months passed, then a year. Valari Prime was rebuilt, not as a throne world, but as a council city. No military, no empire, just people, scarred and rebuilding. Human engineers walked side by side with former slaves, patching power lines, planting crops, building shelters. The scars remained, no one covered them. They were part of the map now. In the Terran War Archives, a room was sealed off permanently, not locked, sealed. Inside it were photos, videos, data shards, every atrocity, every scream, every broken body. Earth called it the Room of Reckoning. There were no tour, no plaques, no music, just the truth. And above the entrance, a single engraving carved in stone. We watched, now you will too. Colt Bremer never returned to Earth. He stayed in the fringe systems, rebuilding broken colonies with the same grit. He used to bury enemies. He didn't talk much anymore, didn't need to. His eyes said everything. I saw what they did, and I did worse so it wouldn't happen again. T-Ven stepped down from leadership 3 years after the war. No funeral, no memorial. He left Hessen 3 quietly and was last seen on a backwater moon, teaching miners how to shoot. Someone once asked him if he missed the fight. He shook his head and said, "I miss my brother, I miss silence, and I miss knowing the stars weren't on fire." Eric Dern gone, no records. Some say he died in the rubble of Valerie Prime. Others say he walks the border worlds, planting truth the way the Dominion once planted fear. But some swear they've heard a voice on rebel broadcasts, low, broken, steady, whispering through old comms during power surges, a ghost saying the words that shattered the sky. You want war? Then watch closely. The war was over, but Earth was not done, because the galaxy had watched, and now it remembered that humans didn't fight for expansion, didn't kill for sport, didn't rise for conquest. They rose for truth, and they burned for freedom. So if any empire ever rose again, if tyranny dared lift its head, it would look at Earth and remember the last time it challenged humanity, and what humanity said, not with diplomacy, not with mercy, but with fire. You want war? Then watch closely.